The air in Riverrun was thick with the scent of steel, smoke, and old blood. Robb Stark stood atop the castle's tallest tower, his eyes locked toward the distant western horizon, the land of Lannisters. Below him, his bannermen debated, argued, and waited for his word. Word of Tywin's regrouping had reached them, but Robb's heart no longer beat for skirmishes in the Riverlands. This wasn't his father's war anymore. This was his war now, and he wanted to end it where it hurt the Lannisters most. "The Riverlands are bleeding," Great John Umber bellowed in the War Council the night before, slamming his mug on the table, "and we sit and plan for weeks while the lion sharpens his claws." But Robb hadn't flinched. He let the lords rage, as they often did. When silence finally came, his words dropped like winter's first snow, silent, cold, and deadly. "We're not fighting Tywin in the Riverlands," Robb had said. "We're taking Casterly Rock." At first, they had thought it madness to march hundreds of miles west, leaving the river lords exposed, but Robb's voice was steel. "Tywin's strength is his pride, and his pride lives in that castle of gold. We cut the lion's heart out, and the body dies slow." Catelyn had begged him to reconsider. "Your men will tire. The rock has never fallen, not once. Do not throw your father's memory into a pit of lions." But Robb was no longer her boy. He was the king in the north, and kings don't beg. They moved fast. With the Freys grudgingly opening the twins again, Robb split his army into two. The larger host, led by Lord Karstark, would pretend to march south to bait Tywin. Meanwhile, Robb would lead his best men westward, cutting through the Westerland's lesser defended roads, avoiding major keeps, moving like a ghost through enemy lands. It was a daring gamble. A gamble only someone with Stark blood and wolf instincts could attempt. They rode by night, rested by day in abandoned villages. The small folk in the Westerlands were terrified at first, but some gave them bread and news. Many had grown weary of Lannister rule. Taxes had bled them dry, and their sons were off dying in some far-flung river battle. Then came the first real test: feast fires. A minor Lannister hold, but heavily garrisoned. Robb knew they couldn't risk a siege, but they couldn't leave a force behind them. So he did what his father might never have done. He sent Grey Wind in first. In the moonlight, the direwolf was death itself, sowing terror in the barracks, while Robb's men stormed the walls. They took the keep in under an hour. No prisoners. No mercy. After that, the Westerlands trembled. News reached King's Landing like wildfire. Tywin Lannister was stunned, not just by the loss, but by the sheer audacity. "The boy plays at war like a man who knows no fear," he muttered in the Red Keep. "He forgets what the rock is." But it was too late. Robb's host had split. Again, Sir Brynden Tully and a vanguard of seasoned men rode south to distract Lannisport. Meanwhile, Robb, Grey Wind, and a force of 3,000 approached the rock itself from the shadowed cliffs by sea. With the help of smuggled boats and maps stolen from captured Lannister scouts, they planned a night assault from below, where the gold mines met the sea. The climb was treacherous. Men died on the rocks, silent screams swallowed by waves. But when dawn broke, the Stark banner flew. Atop the gates of Casterly Rock, the impossible had happened. The heart of Lannister pride had been taken, and the realm would never be the same again. King's Landing awoke to chaos. The red walls of the capital had never felt so suffocating, even under the Targaryens. When the Raven came bearing news that Casterly Rock had fallen, the silence in the small council chamber was deafening. Tywin Lannister stood still, as if stone had replaced his flesh. Varys was the first to break the silence. "Impossible," he whispered. "That castle hasn't fallen in 1,000 years, but the Raven's seal was clear. The Stark direwolf flew above Casterly Rock, and the blood of dozens of Lannisters now soaked its golden stones." Cersei was livid. "How could this happen? He's a boy with a wolf!" she screamed, pacing furiously. "You promised me." He would be crushed in the Riverlands. Tywin didn't speak. His jaw was clenched, eyes dark. For the first time in decades, the Lord of Casterly Rock had lost control, not of a battle, but of everything. Back at the rock, Robb knew this was no final victory. The rock was strong, but the real war was just beginning. His men celebrated, but he didn't. "Let them drink," he told Lord Bolton coldly. "Tomorrow we prepare for a siege. Tywin will not let this insult stand." And indeed, Tywin did not. The very next day, ravens flew across Westeros to Harrenhal, to King's Landing, to Old Town. Lannister banners rose like wildfire. From every corner of the Westerlands, Tywin called his banners home, but he didn't stop there. He struck deals with the Reach, promising Highgarden greater lands and royal marriages if they aided in reclaiming the Rock. Back in Casterly Rock, Robb faced new problems. The gold mines had been sabotaged during the attack. Lannister guards had collapsed several tunnels in their retreat, burying treasures and soldiers alike. And food was short. The Rock was never meant to house so many men for so long. Catelyn finally arrived, days after the fall. She rode hard with a few loyal men, her face pale with worry. "You've awakened a sleeping dragon," she told Robb, "and Tywin Lannister breathes fire made of gold and vengeance." But Robb had changed. He was no longer the grieving son, who had left Winterfell. The fall of Casterly Rock had forged him into something harder. "Then let him come," Robb said, his voice like ice. "Let the lion try to take back what he could not protect." Trouble brewed within his own ranks too. Rose Bolton, ever quiet and watchful, had grown restless. "A bold move, Your Grace," he told Robb one evening. "But bold moves turn men into legends or corpses." "Are you saying I should have stayed in the Riverlands and bled for months like the Tullys?" Robb asked him. "I'm saying you've stolen the lion's crown, and lions bite hardest when cornered." Soon, Tywin's host began to move. 40,000 strong, reinforced by troops from the Reach and Dawn, an army unlike anything Westeros had seen since Robert's rebellion. And at its heart, Tywin himself, wearing no smile, giving no speeches, only marching. Like a storm, made flesh, Robb knew he couldn't face Tywin in open battle, not yet. His strength was surprise and terrain. He ordered trenches dug, oil boiled, and arrows prepared. Every wall of the rock became a fortress within a fortress, yet that wasn't the worst threat. Jaime Lannister had escaped captivity. Rumors said he had broken free from Riverrun with the help of a sellsword company. And now he was gathering men in the Westerlands, not to reclaim the rock, but to cut off Robb's retreat, to trap him in the lion's mouth. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Joffrey, drunk on pride and cruelty, demanded to ride west himself. Cersei, fearing her son's life, forbade it. But the people of the capital were already whispering, if the Lannisters can't protect their own castle, how can they protect the realm? Faith in the crown began to rot. The Iron Throne sat heavier. Beneath Cersei's fury, in the north, word of Robb's triumph had sparked a dangerous hope. Houses that had wavered, like the Glovers, the Mormonts, even the wild Karstarks, now saw him not just as a boy king, but as a true wolf of Winterfell. But with that hope came danger. Everyone expected him to win now, to hold the rock, to strike again. And he knew he had climbed a mountain made of gold, but now he stood alone at the top, with nothing but knives waiting below. Night fell over Casterly Rock, and the lion began to roar back. Cold wind blew in from the sea, sweeping over the high towers of Casterly Rock. Robb Stark stood on the battlements, his direwolf grey wind pacing behind him, restless and sharp-eyed. Below, his men moved with the urgency of those who knew they were surrounded. Every torch burned like the last candle before darkness. The siege had begun. Tywin Lannister's army stretched across the horizon, 50,000 strong, banners fluttering like blood-stained thunderclouds. Their camps glowed orange in the night, like a ring of fire tightening around the rock. He hadn't attacked yet, not fully. Tywin was waiting, starving Robb slowly, like a predator playing with its prey. Inside the rock, food was already running low. The Westerlands had been stripped bare before Robb's arrival, and though they had managed to seize some stores, it wasn't enough for a drawn-out war. 3 weeks, said Lord Bolton one morning, his pale eyes cold and clinical. Perhaps. 4 if we ration hard. After that, we begin to eat rats and hope the men don't turn on each other. Robb nodded, jaw clenched. We won't be here that long. He wasn't sure he believed it. He had sent ravens to the north, to the Riverlands, even to the Vale, but birds could be intercepted, and every day the skies grew quieter. His bannermen still followed him, for now, but even Greatjon had begun asking, "What's the plan, boy?" What haunted Robb more than Tywin's host was the silence of Jaime Lannister. He had vanished weeks ago, but his absence felt heavier than his presence ever had. Scouts whispered of a growing force moving through the foothills, small, fast, brutal. Villages loyal to Robb burned in the night. Whoever led those men knew the rock's weaknesses. Someone who had grown up here. Someone who had once called these walls home. Jaime was coming, and Robb couldn't spare a single man to chase him. Tension within the castle walls grew. 2 soldiers stabbed each other in a fight over wine. A blacksmith was caught hoarding bread. Another was flogged for trying to escape in the night. Lady Catelyn begged her son to seek terms. "You've made your point," she said. "You struck fear into the lion's heart. But now you must live to fight again. Retreat, negotiate, find another path." But Robb was too deep now. "Too far. I brought the war to their doorstep," he said. "And now I can't walk away like a coward." Catelyn's voice broke. "Your father didn't raise a coward, but he didn't raise a fool either." In the shadowed halls of the rock, another danger stirred. Roose Bolton, quiet, calculating. He never spoke against Robb, not directly, but his men were whispering. The Dreadfort soldiers took food others didn't have. They walked the halls at night like ghosts. And Bolton always watched Robb with eyes that measured more than loyalty. "He's waiting," said Sir Brynden Tully one night by the fire. "Not for a Lannister victory, for a Stark defeat, so he can choose the winning side." Robb didn't reply. He knew it was true. Then came the first Lannister assault. In the dead of night, a breach was attempted through the mine tunnels beneath the castle. Explosives, fire, screams. Dozens of Lannister soldiers poured in before Robb's men sealed the lower gates with flaming oil and falling stone. The dead burned deep in the belly of the rock, but not all were Lannisters. Robb lost 50 men, and the message was clear. Tywin was done waiting. He would take back his pride with fire and steel, but just as hope flickered its last, a raven arrived. The Vale had moved. Lord Jon Royce, with the blessing of Lady Arryn, had begun a march west. 5,000 knights from the Mountains of the Moon, armoured and fresh, were heading straight for the Lannister flank, and better yet, they carried news. Stannis Baratheon had laid siege to King's Landing. Tywin's line was stretched thin. Robb saw a flicker of opportunity, but it came at a price. To strike now meant risking everything, and more troubling, the Raven came with a personal message, unsigned but sealed with blue wax. "Your bannermen are not all loyal. Beware the man who does not sweat." Roose Bolton, the knife in the shadows, was getting closer, and outside the lion was ready to roar. The 4th week of siege turned the golden walls of Casterly Rock into a tomb of tension. Hunger gnawed at every soldier's gut. Salted meat was gone. Rats had become a delicacy. The smell of rot and sweat filled the great halls that once echoed with the pride of Lannister feasts, and in the heart of it all, Robb Stark sat silent. on a cold stone throne that wasn't his, but felt more his than Winterfell ever had. At night he barely slept. Every sound could be an arrow. Every silence could be betrayal. The message from the Vale had stirred hope, but days passed, and no cavalry arrived. His scouts were vanishing, not killed, not found, just gone. As if swallowed by the land itself, he began suspecting the truth. There was a traitor among them, and all fingers pointed to Roose Bolton. It started with whispers. Bolton's men were hoarding food again. Then a gate guard claimed he saw Bolton's. Second in command, Steelshanks, meeting with a figure cloaked in Lannister red outside the mine shaft. When confronted, the man vanished before dawn. Robb summoned Bolton. The Lord of the Dreadfort walked in with his usual silence, eyes like still water, impossible to read. "You've been loyal," Robb said, standing by the war table. "Since the start. You fought beside my father." Bolton merely nodded. "I fight for the North. I serve the king." Robb met his gaze, hard as ice. "Then why do my men starve while yours eat fresh pork? Why do ravens vanish after they pass through?" "Your quarter?" Bolton blinked once, slowly. "Because your enemies are clever, your grace, and fear makes men see shadows where there are only men." Robb felt it, the way the man said "your grace" like it was a joke. He wanted to have him arrested then and there, but he knew the truth. He couldn't. Not without proof, not surrounded by starving soldiers who might prefer full bellies over loyalty. He dismissed Bolton, but the seed was already poisoned. The next day the attack came. Not from outside, from within, just before dawn. The mine tunnels, thought to be sealed, erupted with fire. Explosions shook the lower chambers. Bolton's men turned on the Starks from inside the barracks, blades drawn, their betrayal as cold and calculated as their lord. Grey wind tore through two of them before they could reach Robb's quarters. The direwolf's howl echoed through. The rock, like the scream of the old gods themselves. Robb, sword in hand, led what loyal men remained into the chaos. He found Steelshanks dead near the stables, his throat slashed. A red cloak on his body told Robb all he needed. Lannisters had entered the rock. Somehow, some way, they were inside. Roose Bolton was nowhere to be found. By nightfall, the halls were slick with blood. Dozens of Robb's men had fallen, but so had the traitors. It wasn't a complete betrayal. Only a part of Bolton's host had turned, enough to shake morale, enough to open a gate, even if only briefly. And worse, one of the hostages taken in the chaos was Catelyn Stark. They found her brooch near the inner stairwell, smeared with blood. Robb knew the Lannisters wouldn't kill her right away. She was a prize now, a tool for negotiation, or worse, bait. Rage threatened to consume him. Not the cold, honorable fury of his father. No, this was wildfire in his veins. He wanted to burn everything, but rage wouldn't feed his men. Rage wouldn't save his mother. He retreated to the war room and looked at the map. Tywin's main force still camped outside the walls, waiting. Jaime's raiders had not yet breached the rock. Their path seemed designed to squeeze Robb in rather than charge forward, and the Vale's army still hadn't arrived. Either they'd been delayed or betrayed. Then came the final dagger. Second Raven arrived. No signature, no house seal, only 6 words scrawled in a black hand. The phrase "march to join Tywin." Robb read it twice, then again, and felt the cold of the North return to his soul. He was surrounded, inside and out. But something inside him, something darker, whispered, "Let them come. Let them all come. Let me show them what it costs to betray a wolf in his den." He turned to Grey Wind and whispered, "This is no longer a war for peace." The direwolf growled, and Robb Stark began to plan the bloodiest trap Westeros would ever remember. Snow fell that night, soft, slow flakes like ghosts drifting down from a sky that knew winter had come early. Casterly rock, once golden and proud, now looked like a frozen corpse cloaked in frost and ash. Fires burned in every tower, not for comfort, but as beacons of survival. Inside its halls, Robb Stark was no longer a boy, no longer a king trying to win a war. He was a predator, planning his final kill. The betrayal by Bolton and the Freys had snapped something inside him. Not just the illusion of unity, but the belief that honor alone could win this war. If the South dealt in treachery, he would answer with terror. If his mother's life was the price of fear, he would make them pay with screams. The first move was silence. For 2 days, Robb gave no orders, no patrols, no counterattacks, no meetings. His men whispered that he had gone mad, but in truth, he was watching, learning the rhythm of the siege. When Tywin's scouts moved, where his banners were thinnest, when food was delivered, who came and went from the rock's broken tunnels, then he summoned the only 2 men he trusted, Sir Brynden, Blackfish Tully, bloodied but unbroken, and a young northern scout named Wylis, a bastard from the Wolfswood, who moved like shadow. "I want out," Robb told them. "Not all of us, just me and 20 men. Wylis will lead. I know where the weakest camp is, and I know how to make Tywin bleed." Blackfish stared at him. "You want to abandon the rock?" "I want to give it a reason to survive," Robb replied. That night, cloaked in Lannister armor stolen from corpses, Robb and his hand-picked men vanished through the mine tunnels. Wylis knew the paths, deer tracks and goat trails the Lannisters would never guard. They moved under the stars, avoiding villages, avoiding roads they didn't ride. They ran. By dawn, they were miles from Casterly Rock, and Robb's true plan began. He attacked not Tywin's army, but his supply lines. One by one, the camps carrying food and grain went up in flames. At a river outpost, they ambushed a convoy of Frey reinforcements, 3 dozen dead, and Robb left behind their flayed skins nailed to trees, a message to Bolton. "You want to play monsters? I'll show you a northern nightmare." Panic spread through Tywin's host. They doubled their guards. They spread thinner across the land. And most importantly, they moved slower. Inside Casterly Rock, word spread. The king in the north still lived. That he was out there, turning lions into carrion. Morale lifted. The weak stood straighter. The starving held on. Even the men who once doubted him sharpened their blades again. Tywin knew Robb had escaped, and for the first time in years, the old lion looked unsure. He hadn't expected this level of cunning. He had expected pride, honor, the Stark way. But this Robb, this wolf, bit with poisoned fangs. Tywin tried to counter. He sent Sir Gregor Clegane to hunt Robb down, the mountain, butcher of the Riverlands. But Robb never stayed in one place long enough. His scouts watched the mountain from hills and trees, always one step ahead. And then came Robb's masterstroke. With help from disillusioned Westerlander peasants and a few gold bribes from stolen Lannister coffers, Robb tricked Tywin into believing a major supply caravan was headed west from Old Town. Tywin took the bait. He ordered a third of his army to intercept it, and that's when the Vale finally arrived. 10,000 knights and archers under Jon Royce struck Tywin's weakened southern flank like a hammer. The Lannister host reeled. For the first time since the war began, the Lion's army bled in open field. Robb returned that same night, covered in mud, blood, and frostbite. He climbed the outer cliffs of the rock once more. His men opened the gate, and he strode in like a ghost who'd walked out of hell. He didn't smile. He simply said, "Now we finish this." The next morning, Catelyn was returned by the Lannisters, alive, unharmed. Not as a peace offering, but in fear. Tywin had received a raven of his own. No seal, no signature, just a single flayed lion's head drawn in black ink. The message was clear: come any closer and your house dies screaming. The skies over Casterly Rock had turned dark, not with storm clouds, but with the heavy, choking smoke. Of war. Tywin Lannister's siege had broken into desperation. His banners, once proud and sharp against the wind, now sagged like tired ghosts. His soldiers whispered of the wolf that couldn't be caught, of flayed men in the woods, of a king who bled but never died. Robb Stark had returned, and now he would end it. The alliance with the Vale had changed the balance. Jon Royce had struck, odd from the south, cutting through Tywin's supply routes and forcing the Lannisters into a defensive crouch. Yet Tywin was no fool. He pulled back, regrouped, and called upon the Freys and what was left of Bolton's loyalists. But it was too late. Robb had already drawn the circle. In a daring move, he sent false ravens using captured Lannister seals, feeding misinformation to Tywin's allies. Frey reinforcements marched into an ambush laid by northern scouts. Half were slaughtered, the rest fled. Lord Walder Frey, humiliated and now surrounded by southern lords who saw no honor in his betrayal, retreated back to the Twins and Roose Bolton. He never made it out of the Westerlands. His final mistake was trusting a captured tunnel beneath the rock. Robb himself sealed it, trapping Roose and his men inside with only darkness, rising water, and their own screams. "He doesn't die like a lord," Robb muttered, standing above the tunnel entrance. "He dies like a rat." By the time Tywin understood the full scale of Robb's plan, it was already happening. Nightfall brought fire. The Vale struck from the south again, but this time they didn't stop at the Lannister flank. They set the camps ablaze. Archers from Casterly Rock, newly reinforced by northern levies from the coast, rained fire-tipped arrows into the heart of Tywin's command center, and from the cliffs Robb struck the final blow. With 200 of his best fighters, he led a downhill charge, wolves descending upon lions with unrelenting fury. Grey wind tore through men like a demon out of the old tales, blood steaming on his fur. The Lannister lines broke. Many ran, some begged. Tywin stood his ground, but he was old now, tired, alone. Robb found him in the ashes of a burning tent, sitting in a chair, sword on his lap. "You came for gold," Tywin said, voice hollow. "But you've inherited our curse instead." Robb looked at the lion, the man who'd orchestrated the Red Wedding, who had ruled Westeros from the shadows, and saw nothing but decay. "I didn't come for gold," Robb said coldly. "I came for your legacy." And then, with no fanfare, no final speech, Robb Stark slit Tywin Lannister's throat. It wasn't war anymore. It was vengeance. By dawn, the siege was over. The rock stood tall, scarred, burned, soaked in blood, but it stood, and at its highest tower flew not the lion, but the wolf. The king in the north had done the impossible. He had taken Casterly Rock, held it, and shattered the Lannisters in their own den. But the cost was carved into his face. Catelyn had returned alive, yes, but changed. The pain of war never left her eyes. Blackfish had taken a mortal wound during the final charge. Thousands were dead. And Robb himself. He wasn't the boy who rode from Winterfell anymore. He barely resembled the man who was crowned king. He stood in the throne room of Casterly Rock, surrounded by dead gold and dying dreams, and knew that nothing would ever be the same. The South would never forgive him. King's Landing would send assassins. The Iron Throne would never forget. But none of that mattered, because now they feared him. The North had teeth again, and the lion's roar had been silenced forever.